Have you ever felt just utterly exhausted by your own mind? And I don't mean physically tired, I mean that deep, profound psychological exhaustion where you feel constantly torn between totally different desires, where you're paralyzed by indecision, or weighed down by this bizarre, unexplainable guilt whenever you make even a simple choice. We have a lot of names for this, right? We call it self-sabotage, we call it imposter syndrome, we look in the mirror and we think, why can't I just be at peace with myself? We tend to treat this inner turmoil as a flaw, like it's a character defect or a sign that we are somehow fundamentally broken. Okay, let's dive into this, because what if I told you that this mental exhaustion isn't a defect at all? What if it is an ancient, incredibly fundamental feature of your biology? Today, in this explainer, we are going to look at the groundbreaking evolutionary biology of Robert Trivers, and we're going to uncover a biological revelation so profound, it is literally going to change how you view your own mind.
For centuries, both psychology and philosophy have operated on one massive, fundamental premise, and that premise is that a human being, that you, possess a single, harmonious, unified self-interest. The underlying assumption has always been that deep down, there is just one you trying to navigate the world, and any internal conflict you feel is just a glitch in your system. Well, I want you to take a deep breath and just let that premise go. Because biologically speaking, it is entirely false. You are not a unified entity. Your body is not some perfectly harmonious temple. It is a battleground. Just let that weight sink in for a moment. The reason you constantly feel like you are your own worst enemy is because at a literal cellular level, you are fundamentally divided.
Trivers presents a truly radical concept here, and it completely shifts our understanding of kinship in genetics. You see, you are literally two separable people locked inside a single body. You have a maternal self, built by the genes you inherited from your mother, and you have a paternal self, built by the genes you inherited from your father. And here's the kicker. These two halves, they do not always agree. In fact, actually scratch that. They are actively locked in an ancient, invisible genetic war. They have divergent evolutionary aims, completely different theories of reality, and entirely distinct survival agendas. You are not one person trying to figure things out. You are a walking, breathing coalition of two completely distinct genetic lineages that have been forced to share the exact same vehicle.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it completely rewrites basically everything we were taught in high school biology. We used to think that genes had absolutely no memory of where they came from, right? A gene was a gene, whether it came from mom or dad. But in the 1980s, biologists discovered something absolutely shocking called genomic imprinting. It turns out there is a minority of genes within you that remember exactly where they came from, and their expression level depends entirely on their parent of origin. There are maternally active genes that literally only turn on if they came from your mother, and paternally active genes that only activate if they came from your father. They fiercely retain their origin identity, and they use that identity to battle for contrasting evolutionary demands inside you every single day.
To really see how violent this conflict actually is, we don't have to look very far. We just have to look at the womb. Let's look at two specific imprinted genes discovered in mice that also directly apply to mammals, including us. On the left, we have IGF-2, which is a paternal gene. Its one and only goal is aggressive fetal growth. Why? Well, because the father's genes want this specific offspring to extract as many nutrients from the mother as physically possible in order to survive. The paternal genes are largely indifferent to the mother's future children. But then, on the right side, we have IGF-2R, a maternal gene. Now, the mother absolutely wants this baby to survive, but she also needs to survive herself, and she needs to preserve biological resources for her future offspring. So, her gene, IGF-2R, literally hunts down and degrades the proteins made by the father's gene, destroying about 70% of them. This is a massive, incredibly costly biochemical push and pull. We are physically built by forces that are trying to cancel each other out before we are even born. And this war, it does not stop at birth. It absolutely does not stop when you take your first breath, or when you grow into a fully functioning adult. The battleground simply shifts. It transitions from the physical, nutrient resources of the womb directly into the biochemical resources of your brain. This genetic battle maps directly onto the physical geography of your mind as you develop. Your internal psychological conflicts are literally, physically, woven into the different lobes and cortices of your brain, essentially turning your mind into an ongoing geographic border war. It is truly incredible, and kind of terrifying to think about.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how deep the divide goes. Scientists have actually mapped this literal border war using what are called chimera mice. These are mice that were genetically manipulated to have either a much higher fraction of doubly maternal cells or doubly paternal cells, and the results are just astounding. When cells are doubly maternal, they gather together and build the neocortex. That's the large, wrinkly outer part of the brain that is totally responsible for social intelligence, kinship, and family investment. But what about the doubly paternal cells? Well, they completely disappear from the neocortex. Instead, they aggregate deep down in the hypothalamus, and that's the primal, ancient part of the brain that drives raw hunger, aggressive growth, and pure ego. Your brain's literal architecture is segregated. The maternal genes essentially build the social diplomat, while the paternal genes build the self-centered survival.
So, what does this actually mean for your daily life? Well, it means you are constantly experiencing what Travers calls selves deception. Notice that plural there, selves. You literally have two genetic selves arguing inside you right now. The maternal neocortex leans in and softly advocates for altruism. It's saying, hey, family is important, I must sacrifice for the group, I need to be fair to others. But meanwhile, the paternal hypothalamus interrupts, aggressively fighting for pure egoism, shouting, no way, I'm hungry, I want resources, I need to take care of me first. When you are sitting there agonizing over a major life decision, like whether to give your time to a sick relative or focus relentlessly on your own career advancement, you are experiencing the direct biochemical argumentation of your mother and your father, fighting it out inside your own head.
And this is exactly why the consequences of this cell's deception are so profoundly exhausting. This physical, genetic split is the literal root cause of our deep mental tears and our massive decision paralysis. You feel like an imposter sometimes, right? Well, that's because part of you is acting as an imposter to the other part. You experience this constant internal moral argumentation because your maternal genes and your paternal genes literally possess divergent aims and totally different theories of reality. They fundamentally disagree over family loyalty, over who is safe to trust, and over exactly how much of yourself you are supposed to give away. You aren't just overthinking things. You are carrying the weight of a million-year-old evolutionary stalemate.
But of course, this internal conflict doesn't just happen in a vacuum. Let's move to and see how this builds when we introduce the outside world. What happens to this internal genetic warfare when a child is actually exposed to external conflict between the very two people who gave them these genes in the first place? What happens inside a kid when a mother and father fight? The psychological trauma of a failing marriage is something we all intuitively understand. But evolutionary biology reveals a much deeper, hidden biochemical tragedy occurring right alongside it.
Let's walk through this timeline together very, very slowly. When a child witnesses external marital strife, when mom and dad are in the living room having a massive conflict, it is not just the child's ears and eyes absorbing that emotional trauma. Biologically, the child's paternal genome is heavily biased to accept the father's viewpoint, while their maternal genome is biased to embrace the mother's position. So as the parents escalate their fight out in the real world, these corresponding maternal and paternal genes inside the child start to hype up. They hyperactivate. They ramp up their chemical production, violently fighting harder for control of the child's brain. The external fight in the living room literally triggers a massive escalation of the internal genetic conflict, severely intensifying the child's psychological tearing and suffering from the inside out.
Now, to really grasp the absolute power of these independent genetic factions, consider a really profound and honestly quite common example: the arrival of a half-sibling. Imagine a father gets divorced and has a new child with a totally new wife. Anecdotally, we see the original child often reacts with intense, seemingly unexplainable hostility toward this new baby. Psychologists might just label it jealousy or adjustment issues, but biology offers a much deeper, starker truth. The original child's maternal genes immediately recognize a terrifying biological reality. They share absolutely zero genetic interest with this new baby. None. Therefore, the maternal genes inside the original child violently reject the half-sibling, viewing it purely as a massive threat to the father's resources. So that hostility, it isn't just a bad mood. It is a highly active biochemical defense mechanism orchestrated by exactly one half of the child's DNA.
As David Haig, who is an absolute pioneer in this specific field, so beautifully noted regarding the escalating chemical signals in the womb, quote, "A whisper will do. Shouting suggests conflict." I want you to think about your own anxiety for a second. Think about that really intense internal dialogue, that overpowering sense of guilt, the loud, cyclical thoughts that just keep you awake staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m. That mental noise is not a sign of your weakness. It really isn't. It is the biochemical shouting of your maternal and paternal genes in a state of absolute unyielding disagreement. They are literally shouting at each other because they are in conflict over how you should live, who you should love, and exactly how you should survive.
Which brings us to the absolute most important part of this entire explainer. I want you to take all of this incredibly heavy, complex biological reality and use it to do one thing: grant yourself some grace. Understanding the mechanics of genomic imprinting isn't meant to make you feel like some robotic meat suit controlled by selfish genes. No, it is meant to be deeply, profoundly liberating. That mental exhaustion you carry around every day, that constant feeling of being pulled in two totally opposite directions, it is evolutionary hardwiring. It is quite literally the cost of being a complex, sexually reproducing organism on this planet.
So the crucial point is this: we absolutely must reframe our guilt. It is not your fault that you feel conflicted. You are not broken just because you struggle to make cohesive moral choices sometimes. You are quite literally a biological parliament in stalemate. Think about that phrase for a second. You are a democracy of competing, ancient interests. Your inner conflict is not a disease, it is an ancient survival feature that has successfully kept your ancestors alive for millions and millions of years. Every single time you feel that deep, painful tear between self-interest and selfless love, you are simply feeling the two vital halves of your humanity fiercely expressing themselves.
The unified self is an illusion, but my goodness, what a beautiful, breathtakingly complex illusion it actually is. You are not just a single, flawed individual stumbling through life making mistakes. You are an entire ecosystem. You are the magnificent result of millions of years of genetic negotiation. So the question I really want to leave you with today to ponder on your own is this: how will you live, and how will you treat yourself moving forward, knowing the vast, incredible internal multitudes that you contain? Take some time to explore your own biological parliament. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. Stay curious, please stay empathetic to yourself, and I'll see you in the next explainer.